What's going on, my good people? Mike Hidalgo here. Thank you for joining me on another FCP Euro DIY. Today, I'm going to be working on a 2015 Mercedes-Benz W205 C300. Today on the C300 behind me, we're going to be covering how to replace your thermostat. In front of us, we have one of the kits available on fcpro.com, which includes the thermostat, some gaskets, as well as some concentrated coolant. Now, this is a super important and critical regular replacement part, as this is something that does wear over time. It will typically last anywhere from 80 to 100,000 miles. That's not to say that they can't fail beforehand and or last longer than that. The vehicle behind us has about 125,000 miles on it, on its original thermostat, so we're going to go ahead and cover how to replace it today. This is a crucial component to your cooling system, not only because it helps control the flow of coolant, but in addition to that, there's a valve inside of here that when cold, usually supposed to be open, allowing the coolant to flow until the engine warms up, and then it starts to open and close, controlling the temperature of your engine. In which case, if it stays open, your car will never reach optimal operating temperature. On the flip side of that, if the thermostat is stuck closed, then it will not allow the coolant to flow, thus not allowing the engine to be cooled down, overheating, and causing major problems. On top of that, we have some concentrated coolant. It's always a good idea to put in fresh coolant whenever you're doing any sort of job in the system, opening up, draining it out, all that good stuff. This Xerox is going to be compatible with the genuine stuff. It is concentrated, so we are going to be distilling it down with some distilled water. And on top of that, we have some intake gaskets as well. This DIY is going to be applicable to your 2015 to 2018 C300s, GLC300s, SLK300, SLC300, and your E300. So if you have an M274 and one of those vehicles from 15 to 18, then this DIY is for you. Before we get started on this DIY though, let's cover some of the tools we're going to need for this job. For this job, we're going to be using a small 3/8 drive torque wrench. We also have a 3/8 drive and 1/4 inch ratchet. Small pick tool or flathead screwdriver will be handy, as well as a small set of pliers. We have both a 3-inch and 6-inch extension for our ratchets. Electric ratchet makes things a little bit quicker. As far as sockets, the specialty sockets needed for this DIY are going to be an E10 torque socket and a T25. Next to those, we have a 8mm and a 10mm. Something I've added is a 7mm for the clamps coming off of the intercooler, but you can use a short, stubby flathead screwdriver as well. Paint pen is nice to have if you want to mark down your hardware. And for me, I love using dielectric grease whenever I'm lubricating any O-ring, especially on a cooling system. Just a little dab keeps the rings from getting pinched, and it's not going to break down the rubber in the long term. Other things you're going to need, not pictured here, is going to be a funnel and a catch pan for your new coolant and old coolant. Now with that, let's go ahead and get started on this DIY. All right, my good people, we are under the hood of the C300. We're going to get a couple things out of our way before we start draining any coolant. First things first, our beauty cover. Pretty straightforward, just lift up and pull it off. It's just a couple rubber grommets that hold it onto the top of the cylinder head. You can see we have 4 little rubber grommets here, and they just sit on some metal studs coming off of the head. We're going to go ahead and set this to the side. With that off, while I have you here, we're just going to go ahead and pull this intake tube out of our way. There is a tiny little 1/4 turn clip that sits right behind the weather stripping seal here. Just give that a turn, pull this one back. This will lift up. You might have to play with it a little bit if it's not releasing. And then just pull it off the airbox. Same thing, set that to the side. To help us drain the coolant a bit easier, we're going to go ahead and remove the expansion tank cap now. Obviously, you only want to do this when the engine is nice and cold. You don't want to do this right after driving. So if you're going to be doing this job at home, be sure to do it on a nice cold engine. That way you avoid damaging anything on the car and hurting yourself. Cap off, we're going to set that to the side. And then next on our list is going to be disconnecting the battery. For that, we're going to be removing the passenger side cowl section of the C300. The other models that we mentioned, it may be in a different location, so just be sure to check that before continuing on. So you can see there's a lock and unlock little diagram on each one of these. Just a 1/4 turn. We have 1, 2. And we're going to set this to the side as well. Then we're going to go ahead and undo the 10mm that holds our negative terminal just so we can go ahead and pull that off. We have a small 10 mil and a 1/4 inch ratchet. You don't have to pull the nut all the way off, we just have to loosen it. It's just a little pinch pull action, and then we can go ahead and tuck that down. Okay, now we have the battery situated, we have our expansion tank off, we have some of the beauty covers off that we're gonna be getting out of our way. Before we go on and remove the intercooler and any of that good stuff, we're gonna lift the car up and work on draining some coolant. So let's do that now. To access the drain petcock underneath the C300, we're gonna remove this front belly pan. It's held in by 9 8mm bolts. We're just gonna go ahead and zap them out. All right, now we're just gonna go ahead and pull it back towards the back of the car a little bit. Free it up from the bumper. And we can go ahead and set it to the side. Feel free to throw one of the 8mm bolts back up on this middle shield just so it's not hanging and drooping around. All right, with the splash shield off, we have this petcock hose here, if you want to call it that. There's no valve to turn like there is on some of the other Mercedes models. There's a small clamp though. We're going to go ahead and remove that with some pliers. Now, this is of course not the only way to do this. You can just undo one of the coolant lines and break the seal there. But we're going to give this a try, see how effective this is. And this also helps you out if for some reason you wanted to measure how much coolant you were removing. You could just put a little catch can under here and check stuff that way. All right, just shoving a hex head into this plastic bit to give it a few spins and break it free from the rubber. We just took the clamp off with the plug, and we're just gonna give this a few minutes to do its thing and hopefully drain most of the coolant. And just to double check, we can always pop a line off of the radiator and check that as well. All right, so what we're gonna do here is this didn't prove to be as effective as we thought. We're just gonna take a small flathead screwdriver and break the seal here at the end of this hose that this small petcock comes off of, going into our radiator. Small flathead blade will pop that clip free, and then we should be able to get a little bit more flow out of those coolant lines. With that open now, this is obviously a little bit more quicker. We're gonna give that a few minutes to drain, and then we'll come back. We can go ahead and plug it up at that point. We're not gonna need to keep it open, and then we'll go from there. All right, so I just went ahead and clipped that coolant line back in after letting it drain. Again, it wasn't too much coming out. So expect some more coolant to still come out when we undo the thermostat assembly. There's always more. But with that, at least we have some out to give us a better head start. With that, we're gonna go ahead and put our petcock back in, and you can throw the underneath skid shield back on unless you wanna hold off and wait until the end, in case you wanna check for leaks down here or up top, anything of that good sort. But for now, we're gonna leave the cover off just in case we do lose some coolant when we remove the thermostat. We do any spillage, we can get a pan under here and keep everything nice and clean. Just as insurance, I'm gonna pop off the main lower radiator hose going to the radiator itself, just to see if we get a little bit more coolant out of the system. Trying to avoid making a mess up top. So similar to the other line, we're just using a pick to pull this clip down. Once we have that out, we can work the hose off. We have our catch pan situated underneath. And oftentimes these can be a little bit stubborn to get off. They've been on for a long time. So what I like to do is very gently use a small flathead screwdriver just to start working the end of the line off. Again, super gently, barely putting any pressure on it, just giving me another point to pull from. At this point, if you're watching this video before doing the DIY at home, let me just recommend do the main radiator line, going to the radiator itself. The other sub line over to the side didn't really give us anything. This one really emptied out the system. We're gonna be filling up the whole system anyways. So that's gonna help us from making a huge mess up top when we remove the thermostat itself. So main radiator, lower radiator hose going to the radiator, that's gonna be the trick. Now we're just gonna go ahead and feed the coolant line back on, my good people, and that's gonna finalize, I promise for now, the drainage of our coolant. There we go, make sure it sits in all the way. And then you can go ahead and press in your clip. Give it a little tug. Make sure that it's nice and tight and it's not going to fall off once it builds pressure. So with that, now we can move up top and continue on with the actual thermostat removal. Let's get to it. All right, before we pull off the water to air intercooler, we're going to remove a few more things to make our life a little bit easier. There's a couple things like these vacuum lines that are just kind of clipped into the side of it. These typically will just pop up and you can tuck them over to the side. We have our ECU that sits right next to this. We're just going to pull it out to give us more working room. The harness itself is just clipped on over here. You can kind of lift that up. It's just a metal alligator style clip. And then we have a couple electrical plugs. This gray one over here is a little locking tab. Typically on these cars, you just want to pull them up. Sometimes they're a little bit stuck, or if you have a good fingernail, you can wedge it in there. I'm going to grab a small flathead screwdriver just to unlock it. So that's going to look something like this. Just rotate it a little bit, push on it, and pull up. The ECU itself has two little tabs, one on either side, something you would see on like an older style airbox. There's going to be one right here. I'm just going to pop that open. Same thing on the other side. This one's a little bit harder to see, but it is located right at the end of the screwdriver. So pop that open. Then you should be able to swing this baby out and over, kind of out of the way. Now this little bracket is a little bit worse for wear. Typically they're held in a little bit better, but it's going to go ahead and pop this electrical connector off of it. Small tab on the inside. Continuing on with the theme of electrical connectors, we have a pressure sensor right here. We're going to go ahead, same thing, pull back on the gray little locking tab. Now this one is already unlocked, so I just went ahead and put it in the locked position, unlocked it, push down on it, and then you can just push back the electrical connector. Across from it, same style connector, one more. Again, this little gray tab was already unlocked, so someone's definitely been in here, but we'll go ahead and pretend that it was locked. Show you how to unlock it, push down, and disconnect. Moving forward, we have a coolant line here, which we're going to tackle. We have two more coolant lines up front here, and we're going to go ahead and do those now. For this one, you can use a small set of pliers like the ones that we were using underneath the car. Just a little pinch clamp. All right, we can go ahead and just kind of pop this off to the side, let it hang out, tuck it in the cylinder head. Up front here, we have two quick disconnect style clamps, similar to the ones for the main lower radiator hose and the smaller one we did up to the side. Small blade flathead screwdriver. We'll just pop up the clip, work the line off. All right, we got a little bit more coolant coming out. We have our catch pan down below. I'm just going to let that drip into the pan. Second one, the clip is going to be on the top. Just going to go ahead and pop that baby up. For the two clamps here, I'm just going to use a 7mm socket on a 1/4" ratchet. Again, small flathead screwdriver or a flexible driver will work as well. All right, with that, our clamps are nice and loose. Before we can pull this intercooler off, we have a couple E-torques to remove that hold it onto our engine. So let's go ahead and do that now. Continuing on, we have this tiny bracket up here by our left electrical connector. It has two T25s on it that hold it to what is essentially our throttle body over here. So we're going to go ahead and remove those so we can get one step closer to pulling this air to water off. I'm just using a T25 on a 1/4" ratchet. I'm just going to loosen that other one up and swing the bracket over. With that off, we have, from what I can see here, we have 3 E10 torques to remove. Now, this car is a little worse for wear. Out of the 3 that I can see, we are missing all of them but one. First one being here, closer to the cylinder head, near the oil fill cap. There should be one more here where this vacant hole is. You can see, unfortunately, that one's missing. And then coming by our throttle body, there should be one going in towards the plastic housing as well that's missing. So currently, due to those all being gone, we have this kind of play in our intercooler, which isn't ideal. Obviously, you want this to be nice and fixed. You don't want any leaks anywhere. So we're going to try to find some hardware to replace that with. But for now, E10 Torx, we can go ahead and get the one out that we do have left at least. I'm just going to zap it out using the E10 on the electric ratchet. At this point, we have removed all three. We can start working this intercooler off, pulling it towards the front of the car. Just be mindful, there's still going to be some coolant in this. We're going to go ahead and twist it off our elbow here. And here is step one of many to get to this thermostat. With this out, we're going to go ahead and set this to the side and continue on removing a few more items so we get one step closer. All right, moving on, my good people. The next step is going to be working on removal of the throttle body. We have a T25 that secures the dipstick tube over here to the throttle body itself. It's a little sneaky bolt back there. We're going to go ahead and get that one off next. All right, with that one out, we have 4 on the front half of the throttle body that we're going to zap out next. As we pull this throttle body off, we have another little gray locking clip, another tab. So quarter turn there to unlock that baby. Push in, and we can work this off. Now is a great time to wipe any grime and dirt off of this. We had done the front side off camera. You can see post, before. Set this to the side and we can continue on with the removal of this bracket, which is covering the intake manifold, which also has to come out. So let's get more invasive. With that out, we have 4 E10s up top for this metal bracket. We're gonna go ahead and just zap those out using our E10 on the electric ratchet. Now we have this bracket out, we can go ahead and clean it up a little bit, get some of this loose dirt off of it and set it off to the side. Next, we're gonna work on tackling the intake manifold, which sits over the thermostat. Thank you, Mercedes. Before we go ahead and take it out, we're gonna do a little bit of housekeeping, clean up a lot of this loose dirt and debris that's sitting over the manifold. The last thing we want is to introduce anything into our engine. So whether you're using shop air, a leaf blower, a vacuum, whatever you have, clean up as much of this workspace as you can. You saw we put a little shop towel here on the inlet tube just to keep anything from falling in there. And then we'll pick it up with working that manifold off. All right, with the manifold area cleaned up just a little bit, we're gonna continue on disconnecting some electrical connectors. Ultimately, we're gonna undo the connector coming off of the ECU with the gray tab. That's gonna allow part of this harness to swing over, giving us more room to pull out this whole intake manifold. But coming down here, pretty standard, we have a small vacuum line that runs via the front of the block and kind of over the intake manifold into the actual intake manifold itself. That one's going to sit under this connector. We'll tackle it once we get this electrical connector out of our way. First, we have one right here. Same thing, these all have a tiny gray clip. My good people, these are already unlocked. Whoever did this did a rush job last time they were in here. So just, you know, whenever you buy a pre-owned car, this is probably something that is impossible to check unless you get into it, but it's kind of funny to see what you find on an older car like this. Down here, we have another valve that goes to one of our vacuum lines that feeds into our intake manifold. It has a little electrical plug on it. That is supposed to sit in this hexagonal shape, so if for some reason your car is in the same shape as ours, where it's been worked on before, we'll make sure we put that back in its home, reinstall everything. But for now, another little gray connector down there. I'm gonna go ahead and pop that lock, which was clearly already undone, and then we can pull this up. Remember, the orientation of this was under this vacuum line. As we pull this harness up, we have one more electrical connector that comes up with it. We'll go ahead and pull that one now as well. And that'll allow us to swing this harness up and over. Little gray tab, push down. There we go. With that, that's tied into this side of the ECU harness. Now that we have this free, there's really no need to undo it off the ECU. You can if you'd like. But this sits up high enough where it's not really going to be a problem. We can just tuck it up over the cover on the high pressure fuel pump. And now we have a much better view of the vacuum line that we were messing with before. This one back here, which we can just kind of let hang off to the side for now. This one we're just gonna go ahead and kind of give it a head start, coming off of the manifold with a flathead screwdriver. You can hear the vacuum release, and we can just go ahead and swing this baby over. All right, with that, we have a pretty good view of the 5 E10s that hold the top side here of the intake manifold in place. So we're gonna go ahead and work on zapping those out. So let's get ready for that next. All right, with that loose, we should be able to gently work this manifold up, being mindful of the vacuum lines and things that may be in our way. One thing we're gonna do now, as I'm looking at this, to help us a little bit is, on this thermostat right here, we do have another E10 that runs through part of the bracket, as well as here, that holds a couple vacuum lines in place. If we remove this one now versus later, that's gonna give us more room to get this intake manifold out. The alternative would be to just undo the line here instead and pull it out with the manifold, as it does come out with the intake manifold. So I think for that, we can just pull this little clip back, push in towards the check valve, and then pull out, and it'll come out. So depends on what you want to do. That might be a little bit easier, but we will tackle these 2 E10s soon enough, my good people. For now, let's get this manifold out of here. Being mindful of our dipstick, we're gonna go kind of up with it. All right, as we pull this up, back to this original solenoid check valve. That one is attached to the intake manifold, and it is gonna hang us up quite a bit. So what we can do is, right tucked in over here, on the back side of this, where my finger is, we do have a clamp. We can go ahead and release that clamp, pull the vacuum line off, and we'll just leave it hanging out in the engine bay so we can get this manifold fully out of our way. And on the back side, we have one more vacuum line that goes to this canister on the intake manifold. We're just gonna go ahead and pull it off. Here's a better view of where that vacuum line's attached. And now we finally have this manifold out of the way. We can go ahead and set it to the side. We'll replace these gaskets before we install it. Do some more cleanup on it to make it look a little better. But for now, let's move on to what we came for here, which is the thermostat. And some of you might even be watching this to get to the PCB, which, if you saw our other video, the warranty has been extended to 10 years, or recent update as of October of 2023 to 150,000 miles. So hopefully you're taking advantage of that, and hopefully you are not wrenching on your car just yet doing that repair. Anyways, let's move on. All right, with that out of the way, now we have a better view of the coolant lines, the electrical connector, and the rear coolant line that goes to our old thermostat. Here's a view of the new one. So this sits essentially in the engine bay like this. We have 2 coolant lines that we're gonna start with up here, followed by 6 E10s, an electrical connector here on the back side, and 1 more coolant line. The new thermostat comes with a new clip for that coolant line, which is nice. So if you lose that one while you're popping off the old one, don't fret, as you have a new one to install. First things first, we're gonna work on the coolant lines. We have a small engine bracket that sits off to the side here, which holds the intercooler. This is where one of our pieces of hardware was missing originally. 2 E10s hold that on. We're gonna go ahead and zap that off first. That gives us A, room to pull the thermostat almost straight up, and B, gives us better access to the coolant line here. I'm just gonna clip this here for now, we'll move it later. Gives us better access to the clamps on the coolant line right here. So that's gonna be our next step. We wanna keep the thermostat bolted up when we do this, just so we have, basically the strength in the line to be able to pry them off and work them off, whatever we need to do really. This upper radiator hose, pretty straightforward. The clip is facing down, but it's just like the other lines that we've been detaching today, quick disconnect style. So we'll go ahead and work that one off. If you need to, you can pull the clip off entirely if you feel that it's bottoming it out too much on the AC lines, which sometimes tends to be the case, or this might be cooler lines, I'm not sure. So clip is out, We'll put that back in during install. So we can work this upper radiator hose off. So you can see they can be pretty tight and stubborn to get off, especially if they've been on for a long time. So small flathead, just kind of working it to break the seal here. So with that undone, we can pull our radiator hose off. Go ahead and throw your clip back on so you don't forget it for later. There we go. That can just hang off to the side. Now let's tackle the other coolant line hose. And if you're an avid DIYer, you'll know that there's clamps that exist specifically for these type of constant pressure clamps. But sometimes a good set of pliers will just do the trick. At that point, those two forward lines are disconnected. I'm gonna take this vacuum line and just swing it up and over. Now we have two E10s. I go to our thermostat housing right over to the front end of our cylinder head. We're gonna go ahead and zap those off now. Continuing on, we have one more E10 at that little vacuum junction from the top. We have another E10 holding on the rest of that vacuum line and its check valve. All right, with those two removed, now both of these are free. I'm just kind of tuck them out of the way. Coming back over this way, we do have an electrical connector on the back side of things. The little gray release tab is going to be underneath, so you're not going to be able to see it, but you can absolutely feel it. Once you pop the little gray tab off, just squeeze and pull back, and your connector comes free. Now we're going to get just a little bit more cozier. We have one more coolant line that goes to the back of this before we can work the thermostat out. So we're going to go ahead and just pop that clip off. Again, we're not worried about losing the clip. There is a new one on our new thermostat housing. So let's go ahead and get that one off. Now we can tackle the lower radiator hose. Coming off the firewall here, we're just going to rip this clip off. No remorse. Let's get into it, my good people. Small pick is going to be your friend for this one, or tiny head flathead screwdriver. All right, at this point, I should have it off enough where we can work that hose off. Let me check from the other side. There we go, that's what I wanted. I just wanted it to fall out. Now we can work this hose off. Just gotta break the seal, just like the other ones. There we go. All right, holding on the thermostat, there is two E10s, which are captured just like the ones on the intake manifold. You can see where they sit, one on either side. So this clip we just popped off, that one's gonna be hidden under there. You're not gonna really be able to see it, but you can get to it with an extension. And then this other one's a bit more visible from the top. So let's zap those out. I'm gonna come in with an extension, zap this one out. Here it is, my good people. Our old thermostat, definitely really crusty around the ring. And you can see here, granted we pulled it out. This whole thing split, this neck split right here. Granted, this is bolted down to the block. It shouldn't really be moving, but between the seal being able to fail, the plastic failing, or the valve failing, it being stuck open or stuck closed, just like any other vehicle, the thermostat in this is super crucial. So this is a good DIY to have in your back pocket should you ever need to do this job. What we're gonna do now is set this old one to the side, clean up our block, make sure everything else looks good there while we're in here, and then we'll get ready to reinstall our new thermostat. All right, my good people, we are gonna install our new thermostat. Our block is cleaned up where the actual thermostat housing goes into the cylinder block especially. I just used a little bit of Scotch-Brite pad, a little bit of brake cleaner on the pad, wiped everything nice and nice. Whenever you install something, especially coolant related or oil related, it's always good to lubricate the seal either in the fluid that you're working with or a silicone-based grease that isn't going to deteriorate the rubber seal. In this case, my little hack is using dielectric grease. It's great for seals. It's not going to break anything down. And if you don't have that, you can always use a little bit of brake clean. It acts as a great lubricant and will evaporate, so it's not gonna hurt anything. But with that, we can go ahead and feed this in. So let's do that now. All right, we're gonna feed our thermostat assembly in, lining up the bolt holes as best as we can, making sure we're not trapping anything under the thermostat that shouldn't be there. All right, that feels pretty good there. We're gonna take our E10 and just try to feed the hardware in by hand first, if possible. Once we get both of them started, then we can go ahead and work on torquing them down. Now we're gonna take our torque wrench and snug both of those down to 9 Newton meters. Not a whole lot, my good people. So if you don't have a torque wrench, just be mindful you're not putting a whole lot of force to these. While we're on the spirit of bolting down the thermostat assembly, let's go ahead and tackle the 2 E10s that bolted to the top of the cylinder head here. Now with our thermostat bolted up against the block, we can start reattaching our coolant lines, our electrical connector, the PCV system lines hanging off the thermostat assembly before the new intake manifold gaskets and manifold go back in. Now we're gonna work on installing our cooling lines once more. So we're gonna go ahead and feed those back into place, starting with the upper radiator hose. I have the clip closed on it right now, so hopefully I can just squeeze it on and lock it in. There we go. Then for this one, we're gonna swing it over, feed that on. There's little stops on the actual plastic hose. That's how far you should get that hose in. We'll get our pliers once more and just adjust that clamp so it's nice and snug right where it used to sit. With that clamp situated, we can get the 2 E10s and bolt those back up to our thermostat here, holding the PCV system lines in place. So let's go ahead and do that now. With that situated, we can reinstall the bracket up front that we took off earlier. All right, with that, we're gonna move to the back of the thermostat assembly. We have another coolant line back there and our electrical connector. So let's do those now. All right, now we're gonna feed our back coolant line in place, similar to how we installed the upper radiator hose. The clip's already in place. We're just gonna kind of line it up, press in and listen for that satisfying click. There we go. Electrical connector is gonna go back in. Then we'll push the gray tab to lock in the connector. There we go. Gray tab in. All right, now at this point, our thermostat assembly is completely in. It's all buttoned up. We can start routing some of the smaller items back into place, including the intake manifold. So I'm gonna bring that over. We'll show you how to pop out the old gaskets and place in the new ones. We'll get that into place, get all the hardware started, and then we'll start hooking up all the electrical connectors and vacuum lines and all that good stuff. All right, my good people, we have our intake manifold gaskets are actually really straightforward. They're keyed, so they only go in one way. So we're gonna go ahead and literally just pull these out. You can grab the little nub that's sticking out through the keyhole to pull them off. You always wanna replace these whenever something like this comes off, especially something that's gonna be a little hard to get to should you wanna go back and replace them at another point. We're just gonna clean out the faces of them, clean out the channel, and make sure there's no oil or anything in there. I've spent some time just spray cleaning this whole manifold, so it's not too horrible, but we do have a little bit of residual oil in here. With that cleaned up, we can take our new gaskets. They can go on either way. We're just gonna simply line them up with the keyholes, pop them in. Okay. At this point, our gaskets are in. Now what we're gonna do is we're gonna get the manifold closer to in position of where it's gonna be living. We're gonna get our back vacuum line attached. That goes in this tiny little nipple coming off this canister side of the manifold. We're gonna make sure we don't trap any electrical connectors back there while we're doing this. We're also gonna work on the PCV line that connects to the back here, just while we have access to it, and the clamp. We'll get those situated before we worry about buttoning up the gaskets to the front of the cylinder head. So let's go ahead and get this roughly into place and work on that. So we're gonna feed our manifold on. Again, being mindful of the dipstick. We wanna clear that between the vacuum line here and the neck of the manifold. And I want to reach back here for the vacuum line, which is going to be very hard to see. With that on, we're going to take the opportunity of where the manifold is positioned currently to get the PCV line attached as well. So let's go ahead and do that now. All right, with that situated, we can tuck this manifold back under here, get it semi-lined up, pull the hardware back here if it's getting in our way. There's two dowels on the manifold itself, one underneath this bolt hole and one on the other side. Those both key into the cylinder head. Before I go to him on trying to get those in, I'm just gonna make sure we're not trapping anything again. No weird connections or anything like that. I think so far we look okay. So now we can go ahead, just line those tabs up. And I'm just feeding this valve through the intake manifold bit. It's kind of hanging us up a little bit. So we at least get it into position and it's not pushing up against the canister. And it'll help us line everything up. With the manifold butted up, we're going to try getting the 5 E10 started by hand. So let's do that now. All right, let's switch over to the torque wrench. With that, my good people, we can hook up some electrical connectors, some vacuum lines. So let's do that now. All right, with our intake manifold secured, we're gonna work on hooking up the electrical connectors going to the manifold, as well as securing this PCV line solenoid over here. So I'm gonna start with this one here. The rubber casing around it should clip into the hexagonal part of that little bracket coming off of the intake manifold. So I'm just gonna work that over. It's a bit of a tight fit, which is why I assume that the last person that was in there didn't put it back in place, but we're gonna go ahead and work that in, get some electricals hooked up, and then we can reinstall the bracket that comes off of the cylinder head, which supports the intercooler and the ECU bracket. So let's get to it. All right, now that we have this nice and situated, we can start reconnecting the rest of the accoutrements on the intake manifold. Don't forget your vacuum line if you haven't rerouted it already back underneath this bracket. Little metal clip that we transferred earlier. And this one hides underneath this second electrical connector on the actual intake manifold. Little nipple coming off of the canister there. Just gonna go ahead and slide that on. Just like so. Now we can work on the actual remainder of the harness and our other vacuum line. So this one, we're gonna plug in right here to the PCV system. Just goes in, clips in nicely. Then the rest of the line, the electrical connectors are pretty much gonna be lying in the way that they used to go when you took everything apart, which makes everything nice and easy to remember where it goes. Don't forget to lock in your gray tabs. You can see there was a little grommet here on the harness that would hold it here to the intake manifold and here as well. And pop that one in. This yellow one lives right here. And then we have one more connector, which if you remember, came off of the manifold, or should have lived here on this tab here. And it's just hanging out underneath. We're gonna go ahead and sneak it back up. Now that we have everything hooked up there, we can go ahead and reinstall our support bracket. This one has the grommets that hold the cage for the ECU, which will live like so. We can pop those in afterwards though. If you remember at the beginning of the video, it was all loose, so we'll be sure to secure them properly this time around. We have 4 E10s. Just like the rest of the E10s, we're going to torque these down to 9 Newton meters. However, if you don't have a torque wrench, just snug them down gently. It's not a whole lot of force going through these small little bolts. All right, with that situated, my good people, we can go ahead and reinstall our dipstick while we have that here. And we can also take advantage of the room that we have to work with and reinstall the T25 that holds that dipstick to the intake manifold. For the T25, especially these 5 plastic ones that go into the intake manifold off of the throttle body, you don't want to crank on them too much. They are just going into plastic. So once it's snug, then it's going to be good to rock and roll. You don't need to go tighter. This seal is still in great shape. We're going to go ahead and reuse it. However, this is also available on fcpro.com should yours be in bad shape. Now we're going to take our throttle body, plug this baby in, lock in the gray tab, should be good to rock. Harness clips into this little alligator clip down below. There we go. Make sure that lines up. There's a little dowel here on the back side of the intake manifold mounting spot that keys into the throttle body. That'll help you align it, just like that. Then we can take the plastic end with our 4 long T25s. Feed those across. Get that lined up. Get one more on the opposite bottom corner started. And same thing with these, just snug them up super gently. You don't want to crank them down too tight, otherwise you're going to strip out the plastic on the other end. All right, with that most of the way seated in, we're just going to switch over to the 1/4 inch ratchet so we can get a proper feel for them and not risk stripping them out. All right, my good people, we have our bracket situated, we have our throttle body situated. Now we're going to go ahead and install the air-to-water intercooler, feeding it into our pipe over here first, as we feed it also onto the throttle body. It's a little tight, but we'll get it in, just like that. If you need to, go ahead and lubricate this O-ring a bit before you reinstall it, just to give you a little bit of a better chance. Again, brake cleaner, just a quick spritz works really well. I'm going to use a little bit of dielectric grease, as I mentioned before. That's my little hack. Now we have the intercooler situated, we can grab the 3 E10 bolts that hold it into place, which, if you remember, we were missing 2 of them, but we sourced some fresh hardware. We'll get those 3 snugged up, and then we'll tighten down our clamp and our auxiliary little bracket. Just gonna get this one started by hand. I'm gonna get all 3 started, and then we're gonna snug them down. That way we know that the intercooler is in the correct spot. And we have one more by the throttle body side of things. And moving forward above the upper radiator hose. This one's going to be very hard to see, but we have one more down there. And that one attaches to the little bracket that we separated earlier from the cylinder head. Now we have all 3 started by hand. We can go ahead and snug them up. I'm just going to use the electric ratchet. Just remember, in some cases it's going into plastic, meaning just this corner by the throttle body. This one goes into metal, and this bottom one goes into metal. So no more than 9 Newton meters if you're going to torque them down, just like you did the rest of the E10 hardware. All right, with the intercooler situated, let's go ahead and plug in our electrical connectors. Let's secure our auxiliary bracket. T25, same deal. Don't go too ham tightening it up, it just goes into plastic. With this side of things situated, we can take our coolant line, feed that over one more time. Let's fight that little clamp again. Now we can situate the piping at the front of the intercooler. Again, small flathead screwdriver or a socket set just like we used earlier. We're gonna go ahead and grab the small 7 mil on the 1/4 inch ratchet. We're gonna take our 7 mil socket on our 1/4 inch and just snug up these clamps. Make sure that the piping is situated in properly. You don't want any leaks. Now with that situated, we can get our coolant lines back in place. The lower fitting comes right from the driver's side of the radiator. We're gonna close that clip and just push it on. There we go. Then the far one coming over from the passenger side goes on top. Then with those situated, we can plug over this vacuum line back into our little block there. And now we can go ahead and reinstall what is our ECU bracket and our ECU. So 3 little grommets, 3 little studs. They lived happily ever after. You get the idea, my good people. There we go. Now it's nice and secure, unlike when we took everything apart. ECU's gonna come down, and we can get the clip situated on either side of it. And we're gonna take our electrical connector here off from the side that we popped off earlier. Clip that back onto the ECU bracket. Plug that baby in. And lock that sucker down. It's gonna tuck the harness over here. Similar to the clip here, the back side of the harness on this side also clips onto the ECU bracket. Now you're really gonna be able to see it, but you can feel it go on. Just to keep everything nice and tight from dancing around, which all of this was loose when we first took the car apart, so it'd be nice to have it nice and situated properly. Last but not least, alligator clip on the top of the harness, going onto that little auxiliary bracket between the throttle body and the intercooler. All right, to recap, we have our intercooler in, everything's buttoned down, everything's plugged in, ECU sitting back in its home. At this point, we have to reconnect our battery, put our beauty covers back on. If you haven't already, put your belly shield back on, and then fill this baby with coolant. So follow along, we're gonna button everything up, and then get to some coolant. Again, we only ended the negative terminal. I'm gonna go ahead and snug that baby on. It's just a pinch bolt. Don't go too gorilla with this one, my good people. 10 mil on the 1/4 inch ratchet, just to limit how much power you're putting out here, you know? Snug, that's not going anywhere, that's perfect. We can take our cowling cover, put this baby back on. With this nice and locked in, we can go ahead and feed our fresh air feed back into our air box. Pop it in over there, lock up our tab here, our little expanding rivet, feed that on there. With this fresh air feed situated, at this point, go ahead and throw on your beauty cover if you'd like. Don't forget to tuck in the little coolant line on top of the clip here, going through the main engine harness if you haven't done so already. Line that baby up. Okay. All right, my good people, at this point, we have our battery situated, our air feed tube, everything is tightened down, ready to rock and roll. We're gonna go ahead and fill our car with coolant now. Instead of using the vacuum fill tool, which you see is used all the time, we're gonna fill into this car the traditional way, just using a funnel. We're gonna fill it up as much as it'll take. We have 2 gallons mixed up with the Xerox and distilled water, gallon of each. Once the car is topped off here in the reservoir, you're gonna wanna run the car, drive it, let it get to temp, let it cool down fully, and then you can check your level again and top off as needed. So with that, let's go ahead and put some coolant in it. All right, my good people, with that, we're gonna let this be as it is now. We're gonna run the car, and again, once it cools down, we'll check the level and make sure that it's topped off fully. Otherwise, that is gonna conclude this DIY for today. Definitely a bigger job on the W205 M274 equipped vehicle, but certainly something you can do at home with no real special tools. We hope you liked this video. If you have any questions or comments on what we did, leave those in the comment section below. And if you like this DIY and you want to see more like them, please consider subscribing. We make new ones all the time. As always, thank you so much for watching. We'll catch you in the next one.